let me introduce quickly Pascal Lambert. Pascal Lambert is a group country head of Singapore, head of Southeast Asia and India, Société Générale. Pascal took the role on the group country head in September 2012. Before that, he was regional operating officer for Société Générale in Asia Pacific, in a private bank, investment banking, in the Asia Pacific, where he led the Global Business Service Group since January 10. He joined Société Générale Corporate and Investment Banking in Hong Kong in 2009 as Chief Operating Officer for Asia Pacific. Before that, Pascal spent most of his career at beer steams as a senior managing director in various international segments, Hong Kong, Banque Indo-Suez in Djibouti, Mumbai, and Tokyo. Pascal, representing Société Générale, has been elected as the president of the French Chamber of Commerce in Singapore on 25 August 2017. He also served as the director of Passerelle Numérique, a Southeast Asia and conseiller du commerce extérieur, section de Singapour. Thank you very much. It's a great honor, Pascal, to welcome you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Xavier. It is the first time that I use a shield, so I hope I will be comfortable. As a good banker, I have my mask in my, as a hedge in my pocket, so don't be surprised if I shift to this. I would like also to thank, of course, Xavier for inviting me to be your godfather this year. It's a great honor. As you heard, I've been in Singapore for 8 years, and being here also was a very good way for me to reconnect in a way with ESSEC, given the presence of ESSEC in Singapore. So as a result, so far I and SocGen who have been involved actively in some of the activities here. Every year I come mostly for the Master in Finance to give some pep talk as an alumni, but it's a great privilege to be here today. Also thank you, Xavier, because this opportunity for me to be part of this Imagination Week was also a good way for me to reflect as to what I would have done in your shoes a few years ago. As you heard, also I'm a graduate from the 1980 batch, so it's a long time ago. And when I think about it, you realize that time flies at a huge speed. If you figure out 1980 to today, it's 40 years ago. When I was in 1980, I was looking 40 years back was 1940, and of course you know what was going on at that time. And I was looking at my father, like thinking of his young days in 1940, like it was historical or prehistorical time. But I remember, of course, 1980 very vividly. So time flies at a very huge speed. When I also listen, and I was very glad to come a bit earlier to listen to the various shortlisted initiatives, and of course it's a very significant reflection of the times that we live in today. I'm sure that 40 years ago we would not have thought of the same things, but clearly we live in times which are difficult, but of course with a lot of optimism. The history shows that we always manage to get through this, but also I do realize that my generation was probably a bit privileged as we were between 1940 and today, which again is a significant, challenging period. To put this also a bit in context, and I don't want to look like an old dinosaur, but imagine also 40 years back, things that you can do today that we didn't have. I was also very happy to come earlier and to look at this art presentation, because for us, we didn't have internet, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have all these medias. And for me and for many of you, because it's also part of the European heritage, bande dessinée, cartoon was really part of our education, and still today in Singapore I have a huge collection of bande dessinée that I read always quite faithfully. So it was this presentation resonated quite a bit with me. Think also about telecommunication, of course, and I'm sure that if we had done this 40 years ago, we would have thought of how maybe to imagine internet, to imagine Skype and all these kind of things. You will see later when I go through my career that I decided to live abroad, And at that time, it was probably much more challenging than it is today. Imagine that when I was in Djibouti, my second posting, getting in touch with your family in France was by mail, and it was every week. I remember every week going to the post office in Djibouti. I was the youngest expat in the bank, and I was on duty to go to the post office and collect the bag of mail that we had then to distribute to our colleagues. And of course, the mail that you receive was written by your parents 1 week before. You could not really call your parents. You had to go to the post office. You have to wait your turn, and you had limited discussion, and you had to pay at the post office. And similarly for transportation, I think the first time I took a plane was when I was assigned to Tunisia as a VIE, and I never took a plane before. And I do remember at that time that plane was also, you had a smoking section in the airplane, so something that we would not think of today. And more practically also, when you look at your situation today, I have a son also in the same situation as you. When I was looking for a job, there was no LinkedIn, there was nothing. I remember using a typewriter, a mechanical typewriter, to type my letters, and I was using the directory of ESSEC, sending to 50 alumni, because I could not send two more, because I didn't have time to type so many letters. The inconvenient, in a way, is that today, where you have all these network, any application which is posted attract thousands of candidates. So of course, the competition, I mean, you have much more possibilities, but the competition for any position is also much fiercer than it used to be. So there is a plus and minus. And of course, in terms of entertainment, and I think for me also, I mean, so coming to ESSEC also, ESSEC 40 years ago, I was relatively young, and if there is one thing that I miss from my days is that we're probably all relatively immature, and so take advantage as much as you can from what you have today, because in a few years you will also think, oh, if I had known, I would have done a bit more than what I did at that time. I joined ESSEC relatively young because it was still a time where we could integrate ESSEC after 1 year of prepa. So, and for me, ESSEC was a huge jump in my life, because I was in a suburb. I did my college in Antony, south of Paris, and I did a prepa in Louis-le-Grand in Paris, which was already a big jump, and it was, I did manage to integrate ESSEC after 1 year. So you can imagine also the intensity that I spent in Louis-le-Grand during that period. And ESSEC was the first time for me to live outside of my family, so it was a big move from Antony to Cergy-Pontoise, living in Croix-Petit-Mauve. I don't know if it still exists, but it was a significant step in my life. But in terms of maturity, I remember, for instance, working on some case in macroeconomics, and we didn't have this imagination week that you have today, so you're very lucky to have this. I think there was a course in creativity, but I don't remember attending it, because at that time, coming more from an academic background, you are still a little bit worried of what are they going to expect from me in creativity. There was something on analyse transactionnelle, so, but I was more faithful to the macroeconomics and finance of Florent Aftalion, Fourcent, Génie, and so on. And I remember working on a case which was the term structure of interest rate. I had no clue what it was. I worked on something, and 20 years later, I was working in interest rate derivatives, and obviously, I was deep into these concepts of term structure of interest rate, but when I was at ESSEC, I had absolutely no clue what it meant, so it was purely theoretical. So after ESSEC, I decided I was keen to work abroad. Of course, first I did my VIE, I mean, it was VSN at that time, but I was sent to Tunisia. And when you reflect also the fact that I've always lived abroad, but think that when I did the test for service militaire at that time, because we had the service militaire compulsory, and you did some tests, and bad luck, the test that I did showed that I was not fit to live abroad. They felt that I was too too fragile, maybe. But the good coincidence is that when I was called by the guy to discuss it, this guy had worked with my grandfather in Indochina a few years before, so he said, okay, no problem, we will let you in. So thanks to this, I was able to go to Tunisia. And then after this, I had no real inclination for banking. I do remember also when I interviewed at ESSEC, when during the jury they asked you, what do you want to do? And I didn't really know, so I said, okay, I want to be maybe a journalist. But my banking career also was a bit accidental, but it is true by some of the applications that I did. I mean, we knew some people at what was called Banque de l'Indochine at that time, which became Banque in the Suez. And I was accepted to join Banque in the Suez. And the reason being for me is that it was at that time with Banque Paribas, the two banks which were willing to send young expats abroad immediately. My inclination had always been to work in Asia. I have old family antecedent in Asia. My grandfather worked in Indochina many years ago, and my mother was born in Indochina. So I always had this kind of dream or imagination that I would work in Asia one day. So of course, in the Suez, when they saw me, they said, guess what, we are going to send you in Djibouti. So not exactly Asia. I'm not sure that many people know where Djibouti is. It is in East Africa, between Somalia, Ethiopia, facing Yemen. But it was a big operation for Banque in the Suez. And it's one of the things that maybe I will, when we recap on the lesson learned, is also to be very positive and to accept fate and what opportunities which are offered to you. And I'm not sure that everybody is the same, but you tend to have positive or selective memory. And I'm sure that, Djibouti was probably tough at times, but I do remember a lot of very good things. And one of the things, in terms of leadership, one of the lessons that I learned there is that pretty young, they put you also in position of leadership. They offered me I was for 2 years chief accountant in Djibouti, and I do remember at that time we had no computer. It's kind of what we used to call semi-mechanographic equipment. You had a huge equipment, and people were typing the accounts. And of course, at the end of the year, when you have to close the accounts, it's a big rush. And as a young chief accountant, I decided to spend the night, 31st of December, with the staff to close the account, which seems a very natural thing to do. But when midnight came, they all came to shake my hand and to wish me Happy New Year, because it seems that I'd been the first one to stay with them during that night instead of spending the New Year's Eve with my friends. So it was for me a lesson that I carried a long time, and showing that even when you take position of leadership, you can of course be recognized by your expertise, by many things, but also humility and the acceptance of being accepted and being recognized by your colleagues is something very important. After this, and still in my discussion with Indosuez, I was always saying, send me to Asia. So they sent me at the entrance of Asia, which was India, Mumbai. And for me, also, Mumbai was culturally, as you can imagine, a fantastic experience that I still carry today, because as you could hear from Xavier at Société Générale, I'm also looking at our operations in India, as it's an experience that I really cherished. And in every organization that I worked after, people remember that, oh, Pascal is a guy who knows India, so we'll ask him to supervise India. It's a challenging country, but also culturally, it's a very exciting place. And also, besides work, if you like, I was also very immersed in music. And of course, Indian music is something which is quite fantastic when you want to go into it. I even learned to play the sitar for 9 months. But also India, for me, was the opportunity to step up in my technical expertise. It was a time where we were starting to hear about derivative products in the bank, and had no clue what was a swap. The American banks were selling it to our colleagues, to our clients, but I started to be quite curious about it. And then we started to market swap products. Indosuez was one of the leaders in France on this product, and we had a team in Tokyo. And I was starting to give some quotes to our clients based on the telex, because we had no email, telex and fax, even no fax, it was a telex that we're getting every morning from our team in Tokyo. And I did manage to do a swap with a client in New Delhi. And based on this, the guys in Tokyo were very impressed because it was the first swaps done by industrials outside of Japan. And they asked me to move to Japan and join the team. So I was really in the deep of Asia now. I was very happy. Japan for me was probably the most intensive work in terms of work schedule. I was still single, and we were working on a trading room. And at a time when, of course, all the financial markets, the innovation was developing very fast. And I spent very intense years there, and I was actually covering derivative for the rest of Asia outside of Japan. So a lot of traveling also, which was very exciting. Then after this, it's also one of the key take that I usually share with students is in your career, usually you may have 2 or 3 professional mentors that you need to identify, because these people can also drag you along, can bring you with them. The first one was a guy who actually took me from Mumbai to Tokyo, but the second one was this opportunity to move from a Industrials, French bank, a French guy, to a US investment bank, to Bear Stearns. And I always remember when my former boss also told me, Pascal, if you have one opportunity one day to work for a US investment bank, do it, because it's a different way to work and you will learn a lot. So this opportunity came from my former boss at Industrials, who had moved to Bear Stearns, one of the leading investment banks at that time, like Lehman. And I spent 13 years at Bear Stearns, which were very exciting, starting in derivatives in Hong Kong. And then after this, moving to Dublin to set up a bank for Bear Stearns, and then to London to be in charge of prime brokerage. As many of you may know, prime brokerage is the activity of servicing hedge funds. So at that time, a very booming activity. And then coming back to Hong Kong for Bear Stearns. And again, when I moved to Bear Stearns, it was really, I never heard of this company, but I moved on the faith that I had to the person who actually attracted me and a few of our colleagues to set up from scratch the derivative team at Bear Stearns, which was a great experience. As some of you would know, Bear Stearns was the first victim of the financial crisis before Lehman. And being the first, the Fed actually pushed JP Morgan to take over Bear Stearns, and I was part of this takeover. I was in Hong Kong at that time. I spent 1 year at JP Morgan. And then after this, the third person who mattered in my career, my former boss at Bear Stearns, became the head of investment bank at SocGen and proposed me to join SocGen in Asia, in Hong Kong, where I started 10 years ago. I was the chief operating officer for Asia, and then I was proposed to move here to Singapore. I think what is also important and which resonates with what we heard before is that in 2008, of course, global financial crisis, and it is true that there was an excess of over-engineering, maybe too much innovation in the financial system. I remember also speaking to my older son at that time and thinking, I don't want to be a banker. You bankers, you have destroyed the world with all your CLOs, CDOs, mortgage-backed securities, CDS, and so on. And it took a while for the banking industry to really reinvent itself and to become more relevant. And to that extent, SocGen actually has been a very good experience, because French banks are at the forefront of innovation, but also of societal issue. And sustainability today is, and not today, but for the past few years, has been really at the forefront of our consideration, which is why also today, instead of speaking of the how to be sophisticated, how to make more money, or to find the best engineered product, we also speak of the why, and why are we relevant, and how can we also help the society to evolve. And our CEO always reminds us that when SocGen was set up in the mid-19th century, like with BNP and others, it was really as part of the Industrial Revolution, to build up Canal de Suez and other projects. And today we find ourselves in the same configuration, where we are moving really on two main directions. One is, of course, digital transformation. We have to keep in mind that with the resources that banks have, technology, I mean, the technology is really a key consideration for us, and we, of course, work with fintech and others. But the second one is also societal issues. Banks have been active at a very early stage on renewable project finance. You may know that also we were the French banks was the first one to decide to stop financing coal-related industry, which in my region in Southeast Asia affect us because we had quite a few clients in Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam that we cannot deal today because they are still building coal power plant. And we are very active in financing offshore wind, financing solar projects in the region. And this, I find, is also a very motivating message that we send to our students or to our young trainees when they come to work with us, because we really find a new meaning in what we do. So I think when you summarize or when you take also all these points, there are probably a few texts that I wanted or advice that I wanted to bring with you. I put them on paper, and as they are not exhaustive, I'm sure that if I was doing it next week, there could be a few other points, but I had 7 or 8. The first one, and as you could see from my career, is also to be curious. You need always to have your sense sharpened as to what are the new opportunities, what are the new products, and to be able to learn. One challenge for me today is, I'm the sponsor for Asia for sustainability, so it's really something which takes a lot of my time. At the same time, I'm completely ignorant about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin, and so on, and which is a problem because also this moves also very fast. So I need to learn. Of course, I have some colleagues who are experts in this. One of the privileges also that we have today to be in Singapore is that Singapore is a perfect place, real-time lab, if you want, where the government at all levels is really pushing on all these issues. And we as a bank, like other banks or other companies, are involved in all these discussions. For instance, one of the initiatives we are looking at today with some other Singapore companies, a carbon coalition platform, how can we actually develop, how can Singapore develop be a center for carbon trading and help the rebuilding of forestry in the region. So there are really long-term or complex notions, but Singapore is really at the forefront of these many issues. And of course, you know that fintech is another subject also where Singapore is very well positioned. So curiosity is one. Second, and as you could also understand, when I speak of curiosity, I speak of cultural curiosity also, something which drove me during this career and probably is the adaptability that you have to work with other cultures and to work in other countries. Second one is to be opportunistic. And to prepare this presentation, Xavier sent me some of the past presentation given by other godfathers, and I think Cécile Duflo was speaking of accept to be surprised. And I think it's very important. Opportunities will come up in your career, and you have to take them. Of course, you don't have to accept them, all of them, but don't really think that, there is no way that you can project today what you will be in 5 years or 7 years, and positive accidents will always happen. The third point is to be proactive. Proactive meaning, of course, develop your network, but also raise your hands. When you work in an organization, when you see an opportunity, you have to make yourself known. It happened to me 2 or 3 times. When I moved to Dublin to London, I saw there was an opportunity in London. I called the management. I said, I'm aware of this. Can you consider me? And they considered me, which was good. The fourth point, which is also maybe a bit challenging nowadays, is to be positive. Now there is I spoke of selective memory. I'm not sure if it is the case for everybody, but I think I have a positive selective memory. I always remember all the good things of the past, and I think it's also something which drives us. And there is always some problems facing us, but we have to be very hopeful, and we know that things will get better. But it's very important, and it's also important to have fun in what you do. And for me, being able to travel and to see different culture was part of the fun, but also the great fun that I have today in this position of leadership that I have is to work with a team of people who have been with me for the past 5 or 7 years in Singapore, and with whom we really form a very tight bond. The fifth point is to accept to take risk. To take risk, it can be both at the micro or as well as the macro level. In any organization, we encourage limited risk-taking. I remember when I was at Bear Stearns, which was which was very big in terms of prop trading. The appetite for risk was very significant, as long as it was known and identified risk. If you are a trader and if you lose money, it's not fantastic, but it is accepted as long as it is within the parameters which were set to you. If you do this by hiding stuff, as you can imagine, it's something very bad. But same in your career. In your career, if you, sometime again, when I went to Bear Stearns, I didn't know what Bear Stearns was, but I went there with the face of the people who were calling me, and it was a fantastic decision that I took. The sixth point, I touched on it before, and as all of you, over time, sooner or later, will develop also some position of leadership. There are different styles of leadership, but I think for me, leadership needs to remain humble, and also one of the, nobody is perfect, and I'm sure that I have a lot of drawback, but one of the reasons for the relative success that we may have is the capacity to empower and to work with people who are close to you, and to really give them the means to leverage on their expertise. I spoke earlier about technical expertise, and especially today, and I mentioned, I mean, we have access to so much information, we have so much data coming to us that in the capacity to ingurgite or to digest all this is probably more complicated today than it was in my days, and therefore it's very important also to find the time to upskill yourself and to get this expertise. There is always a debate also in any career, and I speak of bank, but it's probably the same in others, whether we need to have experts or to have generalists. I don't qualify myself as an expert. If there was one, it was in derivative, but it was not all my career. But it is true that when you start, it's probably good to have an expertise, but relatively quickly to be able to broaden the expertise if you want to go another step. And the last point also that I put is both for yourself but also for people who are working with you, leverage on your strengths. And so something that we apply when we work with our colleagues is people have strengths and weakness. Don't point on the weakness, because of course it's something that people will feel quite stressed about, and there's always ways to improve on it. But really know your strengths and leverage on this. And similarly with your colleagues, try to leverage on the strengths of other people, which what you did this week was to work in a cooperative manner, to work as a team. And you work as a team when you know each other respective strengths and weakness, so that you can really be effective at this. And again, I didn't have your experience when I was at ESSEC, but what you have done this week is really something that any organization today does. At SocGen, at Bear Stearns, the time that we take during the year to have seminars where we really think of working on solutions, or also projecting on the future, doing strategy. All this is a team effort, and what you have done this week, I'm sure, will be something very useful. So I think I'm coming at the end of my time, but I'm not sure if you have any questions. I will be happy to address. I'm in Singapore. Again, my direct contact has been more with the Master of Finance, but of course now that I have contact with your batch, if any of you also wants to contact me through LinkedIn or whatever, we are always available. And SocGen also here in Singapore is always happy to come on campus to meet with students. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Pascal. Actually, there are some questions, mostly two questions. I don't know if those students are in the corporate finance track or fintech or whatever, because it's quite technical, I would say. So I'm going to ask to you, and I don't know if you can reply or not. The first one is, do you believe that Société Générale stock price is still undervalued? So that's the first one. The second one is, how do you see the future of banking and the use of cash? So if you can reply to both questions.
Sure. Clearly, the stock price of SocGen is deeply undervalued. And as you can imagine also, it's a concern for many of the employees. I think it's a reflection of a few factors. Globally, I mean, and to be honest, also SocGen is probably more relatively undervalued than other banks and PNB and CACIB and other European banks. But the banking sector in general has suffered a lot in the past few years. When you look in France, and France, the retail banking in France is probably 1/3 of the activity of SocGen. It's very difficult to make money when you are in a context of a negative interest rate because your margin, of course, gets squeezed. Interestingly, when you look in the past 1 or 2 weeks, with the rumors of, and with what we have seen in the US dollars, yield curve steepening and the long rates coming up, the slightest talk of rising inflation will had an impact on the stock price of banks. Banks were probably globally, in Hong Kong, in US, in France, are probably the best performing stocks in the past 1 or 2 weeks. And if you read the Investir or the magazine, you will see that a lot of analysts recommend to buy financials because they are undervalued. So that's the first point. And also, I mean, SocGen also traditionally suffers a little bit from the investors because of our market activity. You know, we are, relatively speaking, to other French banks, the size of our global market activity is quite high, which has been very good. We pride ourselves to be a derivative bank. But also it means that the volatility of these earnings is also quite strong, and some investors don't really like it. As a result, Frédéric Oudéa, our CEO, did announce last year that even though we will of course continue with our strengths, but we'll try to ensure that the relative part of global markets will reduce a little bit compared to the other activity like financing activities and so on. The second point on fintech and cashless payments. I think it's probably going to come. I mean, if you look in Singapore, you know, I have some notes in my pocket, but I don't use them. I use either my card, and more it will be the mobile phone. We do follow also with a lot of interest what happens in China today, where the Chinese central bank is setting up this cryptocurrency, and they hope this to become a mean of payment. And coming back to Singapore, Singapore is looking at it quite actively. You may know that Banque de France set up an office here only a few months ago, and amongst the many remit or the many missions that Banque de France has here is they want to be in Singapore to observe also what is going on in cryptocurrencies in Asia, knowing that in Europe, France is also quite advanced in all these reflections. So yeah, I do think that cashless economy will develop. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Pascal. Thank you for coming with us today.